Behind the pristine facades lurked films so controversial they were banned in multiple states, burned in theater parking lots, and denounced from pulpits worldwide. One legendary director received 50,000 protest letters before his film even premiered, while another classic had audience members fainting in aisles. These weren't just movies. They were cultural battlegrounds that forever changed what could be shown on screen. The Outlaw, 1943. The Outlaw wasn't really about Billy the Kid. It was about Jane Russell's breasts, and eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes made sure everyone knew it. Hughes, who personally designed a special cantilevered bra for his Discovery Russell, battled censors for nearly 3 years to keep shots of her décolletage in the film. The promotional campaign was pure provocation, with billboards asking, "What are the 2 great reasons for Jane Russell's rise to stardom?" while showing the actress sprawled suggestively in hay. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as a flagrant violation of Christian and traditional standards of morality, organizing boycotts across the country. When it finally received limited release in 1943, police raided theaters in several cities, confiscating print. Hughes withdrew it from circulation, re-edited, then re-released it in 1946, launching a publicity campaign so salacious that it led to new advertising regulations. Several newspapers refused to print the ads, calling them a direct assault on public decency. Production was equally scandalous. Hughes, obsessed with Russell's figure, reportedly filmed one scene 107 times, focusing entirely on her cleavage. Director Howard Hawks quit midway through, disgusted with Hughes's fixation. Despite its artistic mediocrity, the controversy made it a massive box office hit, grossing $5 million against a $1 million budget. The Hays office eventually created new rules specifically addressing décolletage in films, informally known as the Russell Regulations. Jane Russell later noted, "Howard Hughes invented the push-up bra for me, and controversy sold tickets, but nobody remembers the movie was actually about Billy the Kid." Number 14. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. The Birth of a Nation revolutionized cinema while simultaneously reviving the Ku Klux Klan. D.W. Griffith's 3-hour Civil War epic featured groundbreaking filmmaking techniques and horrifically racist depictions of Black Americans, portraying them as sexually aggressive predators while glorifying the KKK as heroic saviors of white womanhood. The NAACP launched its first major nationwide protest campaign against the film, with riots breaking out at screenings across northern cities. President Woodrow Wilson screened it at the White House, the first film ever shown there, allegedly remarking, "It's like writing history with lightning." The film's box office success was unprecedented, generating the equivalent of $1.8 billion in today's dollars. More disturbingly, KKK membership skyrocketed in its wake, with new chapters using the film as a recruitment tool. Historians attribute at least part of the Klan's 1920s resurgence directly to the film's influence. Griffith, shocked by the backlash, claimed innocence regarding the film's racial impact. However, production records show he deliberately hired white actors in blackface for negative roles while relegating actual black performers to background scenes. The film's violent legacy continued for decades. Several lynchings in the months after release were directly connected to audiences inflamed by its imagery. Despite its undeniable technical achievements, The Birth of a Nation represents Hollywood's most shameful cultural impact. When the Library of Congress began preserving historically significant films, its inclusion sparked renewed protests, with critics arguing that celebrating its artistry without acknowledging its devastating social consequences perpetuated its. Number 13. Freaks, 1932. Freaks horrified MGM executives so deeply they buried their own film after test audiences fled screenings in terror. Director Todd Browning, fresh off the success of Dracula, cast actual carnival performers with congenital differences, including microcephalics, a legless man, conjoined twins, and a man with no limbs who moved by wiggling his torso. The result was a horror film where the monsters were the protagonists and the beautiful people were the villains. The film was banned outright in the UK for 30 years and heavily censored in the US after preview audiences reportedly screamed, vomited, and rushed for exits. One woman threatened to sue MGM, claiming the film caused her miscarriage. The studio, terrified by public reaction, cut almost 30 minutes from the original and added a more upbeat ending. The original footage is considered lost forever. Browning's career never recovered from the backlash. Studio head Louis B. Mayer reportedly screamed, "You've ruined MGM's reputation," after seeing the infamous wedding feast scene where the performers chant, one of us," to a terrified normal woman. Critics were savage, with Variety calling it an unpleasant, grotesque horror story that was impossible for audiences not to be overcome by nausea. The film lost $164,000 and effectively disappeared until the 1960s, when counterculture audiences rediscovered it as a cult classic. Modern disability rights activists remain divided on it. Some see it as exploitative, others as revolutionary for humanizing its subjects. Ironically, a film once considered too disturbing for public consumption is now taught in film schools as a misunderstood masterpiece. Number 12. Babyface, 1933. Babyface didn't just push boundaries, it bulldozed them, showing Barbara Stanwyck literally sleeping her way from the basement to the penthouse of a Manhattan bank. Released just before strict enforcement of the production code, the film follows Lily Powers as she methodically seduces increasingly powerful men, explicitly trading sex for career advancement. After each conquest, the camera would pan up the bank building's exterior to show how many floors she'd climbed. The original cut was so shocking that New York state censors rejected it outright. Warner Brothers was forced to reshoot scenes and add a moralistic ending where Lily loses everything. But even the sanitized version caused uproar, with women's groups calling it a manual for female immorality, and religious leaders condemning its celebration of promiscuity as a path. Several southern states banned it completely. Director Alfred E. Green shot two versions of key scenes, tame ones for conservative markets and explicit ones for urban theaters. The film's most controversial dialogue included Lily's father's friend advising her to use men as they've always used you, explicitly encouraging transactional sex. Stanwyck later claimed this role nearly ended her career, with studio executives labeling her box office poison for a period afterward. The uncensored pre-code version was considered lost until 2004, when film archivists discovered a pristine copy in the Library of Congress vaults. Modern viewers are often shocked at how explicitly feminist and sexually frank the original cut was, making even contemporary films seem tame by comparison. Babyface is now considered the film that finally forced Hollywood to strictly enforce censorship that would last for decades. 11. Red Dust, 1932. Red Dust made censors sweat with the sight of Jean Harlow bathing naked in a rain barrel while a visibly aroused Clark Gable watched. Set on a rubber plantation in Indochina, this pre-code steamer featured Harlow as a prostitute who seduces plantation owner Gable away from a respectable married woman. The film's blatant eroticism shocked audiences, particularly the infamous rain barrel scene where Harlow, clearly nude, invites Gable to come in and get wet. Religious groups called for boycotts, with the Catholic Legion of Decency placing it on their condemned list. Colonial authorities banned it throughout French Indochina, claiming it incited native populations against white governance by showing immoral European. The British Empire similarly restricted it in multiple territories, fearing colonial populations would get inappropriate ideas about white women. The production itself was marked by tragedy and scandal. Harlow's husband committed suicide during filming, yet MGM forced her back to set just days after his funeral. Director Victor Fleming reportedly engaged in an affair with Harlow while shooting her intimate scene, creating tension with Gable, who was also romantically interested in his co-star. The film's most controversial line, Harlow purring, "What I'm offering you is love, and that's more than she can give you," was repeated in pulpits nationwide as evidence of Hollywood's moral corruption. Despite, or because, of the controversy, Red Dust became MGM's highest-grossing film of 1932. When MGM remade it as Mogambo 20 years later, with Ava Gardner in the Harlow role, the production code ensured not a drop of rain barrel water was shown. Number 10. The Miracle, 1948. The Miracle didn't just offend Catholics, it resulted in a landmark Supreme Court case that forever redefined film censorship in America. Roberto Rossellini's Italian film, featuring a simple-minded peasant woman who believes she's experienced an immaculate conception after being seduced by a man she thinks is Saint Joseph, was condemned as sacrilegious by Cardinal Spellman of New York. who called for Catholics to boycott any theater showing it. The New York Commissioner of Licenses threatened to revoke the license of any theater screening the film. When the Paris theater showed it anyway, protesters formed picket lines while audience members were spat upon and assaulted. The theater's owner, Joseph Burston, challenged the ban all the way to the Supreme Court, which unanimously ruled in 1952 that films were protected by First Amendment free speech guarantees, overturning decades of censorship precedent. The controversy dwarfed the film itself. In Chicago, police physically stopped screenings by cutting projection booth power. In Philadelphia, the Catholic war veterans threatened theater owners with violence. Anna Magnani, who played the pregnant peasant, received death threats despite never visiting America to promote the film. The most inflammatory aspect wasn't even the pregnancy storyline, but rather a scene where Magnani prays to a statue of Saint Joseph that briefly appears to smile at her, which Catholic leaders called mocking the concept of divine revelation. The landmark Supreme Court decision in Burston v. Wilson established that government entities could no longer censor films based on religious objections, fundamentally altering American film history and paving the way for more controversial cinema in subsequent decades. Number 9. Scarface, 1932. Scarface terrified authorities so much that its release was delayed for over a year, while director Howard Hawks battled multiple censorship boards. This Prohibition-era gangster film starring Paul Muni was based loosely on Al Capone's bloody rise to power, with an unprecedented 44 on-screen murders and overt suggestions of incestuous attraction between the protagonist and his sister. Police departments nationwide campaigned against it, claiming it would inspire copycat crimes and glorify gangster lifestyles. Producer Howard Hughes deliberately provoked controversy by adding the subtitle, "The Shame of a Nation," while refusing to include moral messaging. When the Hayes office demanded a new ending where Mooney's character is executed, Hughes shot it, but made it so ludicrously heavy-handed that audiences laughed during test screenings. The censors weren't amused, demanding additional cuts and reshoot, delaying release. From 1931 to 1932, several states still banned it, despite the changes. Chicago, where Capone still operated, refused screenings entirely. Capone himself reportedly sent enforcers to intimidate Hughes, concerned about being portrayed negatively. The film's most controversial innovation was its use of an X motif before killings and the sound of a machine gun over the opening title, techniques later copied endlessly in crime films. Critics were divided, with some calling it a corrupting social influence, while others praised its technical virtuosity. Despite the controversy, or because of it, Scarface earned $600,000 in its first run, an enormous sum during the Depression. The film was so contentious that it virtually disappeared from circulation until the 1950s, with Hughes withdrawing prints amid continued protests from law enforcement organizations. Number 8. Ecstasy, 1933. Ecstasy didn't just show Hollywood's future star Hedy Lamarr fully nude, it featured the first simulated female orgasm in mainstream cinema history. This Czechoslovakian film, released before 16-year-old Hedwig Kiesler became Hedy Lamarr, follows a young bride who escapes an unconsummated marriage to find passion with a virile engineer. The 10-minute scene where Lamarr's character reaches a sexual climax, conveyed through close-ups of her face, shocked global audiences and earned immediate bans in Germany, the United States, and numerous other countries. Pope Pius XVII personally condemned the film in a Vatican newspaper, calling it a public sin against morality. Lamarr's husband, an Austrian munitions manufacturer with Nazi connections, was so enraged he tried to buy and destroy every existing print, spending a reported $280,000 in the effort. When Lamarr later signed with MGM, Louis B. Mayer demanded she renounce the film and claim she'd been coerced into appearing nude. The swimming scene where Lamarr's character chases a runaway horse while completely naked was filmed through telephoto lenses without the young actress realizing how visible she would be. Director Gustav Machati reportedly deceived her about camera positions to capture more revealing angles. Despite being substantially censored in most territories where it screened, the film achieved notoriety that followed Lamarr throughout her Hollywood career. Even while she was making family-friendly MGM films and inventing frequency-hopping technology that would later enable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, Lamar was primarily known as the Ecstasy Girl. The film remained effectively banned in the United States until the 1960s, with customs officials authorized to seize any prints entering the country. Number 7. The Moon is Blue, 1953. The Moon is Blue didn't show a single sex scene, but became the first mainstream American film released without production code approval since its enforcement began in 1934. Director Otto Preminger deliberately challenged Hollywood censors with this light comedy about a young woman who openly discusses virginity, seduction, and professional virgins with two men pursuing her. The film contained forbidden words like virgin, seduce, mistress, and pregnant, vocabulary explicitly banned under code enforcement. United Artists took the unprecedented step of releasing it without the production code seal of approval, essentially gambling the studio's reputation. The gamble paid off financially. The film earned $6 million against a $400,000 budget, but the controversy was immediate and intense. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as immoral and unsuitable for entertainment, giving it a condemned rating. Theaters in Boston, Chicago, Jersey City, Providence, and Kansas City faced police intervention when attempting screenings. Stars William Holden and David Niven publicly defended the film, with Niven calling the controversy manufactured prudishness. Holden even took out newspaper advertisements questioning why the word virgin was considered obscene. The controversy ultimately proved fatal to production code authority. When Kansas and Maryland censorship boards banned the film, Preminger fought back through the courts and won. While modest by modern standards, the film's casual discussion of female sexuality represented a direct challenge to post-war American sexual repression. Preminger followed this success by tackling drug addiction, The Man with the Golden Arm, and rape, Anatomy of a Murder, effectively demolishing code restrictions topic by topic, accelerating the eventual replacement of the production code with the modern rating system. Number 6. Baby Doll, 1956. Baby Doll triggered the most coordinated religious condemnation in American film history, with Cardinal Spellman personally delivering a sermon calling it sinful and commanding 500,000 New York Catholics to boycott the film or face excommunication. Elia Kazan's adaptation of Tennessee Williams's play centers on 19-year-old virgin bride Baby Doll, whose middle-aged husband must wait until her 20th birthday to consummate their marriage. Meanwhile, a business rival seduces her on a porch swing in a scene so suggestive that merely describing it caused controversy. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a C rating before release, the first major American film condemned since 1953. Over 20 million Catholics were instructed to boycott it, while Protestant and Jewish leaders joined the condemnation. Time magazine called it the dirtiest American-made motion picture that had ever been legally exhibited. Theater chains across the country canceled bookings, and Boston and Chicago banned it outright. Warner Brothers marketing leaned into the controversy with provocative posters featuring star Carol Baker in a crib sucking her thumb. The studio even created specially shaped baby doll nightgowns that briefly became a fashion trend despite religious condemnation. Controversy devastated the film financially. Despite critical acclaim, it earned only $600,000 against a $1.8 million budget. Williams and Kazan both claimed they'd created an artistic commentary on rural poverty and exploitation, not a sex film. The Catholic campaign against Baby Doll became so notorious that it inspired academic studies of religious censorship influence, with modern critics noting the irony that a film containing no nudity, sex scenes, or profanity would generate more religious outrage than graphically violent films released the same year. Number 5. Peeping Tom, 1960. Peeping Tom didn't just end director Michael Powell's career. British critics demanded the film be burned. This psychological thriller about a photographer who murders women while filming their dying expressions was released the same year as Hitchcock's Psycho, but faced infinitely harsher condemnation. While Hitchcock became a cinematic icon, Powell was effectively blacklisted, never working in mainstream British cinema again. Critics were unprecedentedly vicious. The Observer called it essentially vile. Tribune labeled it perverted nonsense. And the Daily Telegraph demanded the only really satisfactory way to dispose of Peeping Tom would be to shovel it up and flush it down the nearest sewer. The film was pulled from theaters after just 1 week, with British exhibitors refusing to screen it amid public outcry. Unlike other controversial films where outrage generated ticket sales, Peeping Tom was genuinely suppressed for years. Powell had been Britain's most respected filmmaker after classics like The Red Shoes, making his fall more dramatic. Star Carl Boehm reported being spat upon in public after the film's release. The most controversial scene showed a prostitute discovering the deadly spike hidden in the protagonist's camera, followed by her terror as she backed against a wall before being murdered, all shown from the killer's perspective. This forced audience identification with the murderer crossed a line even Hitchcock avoided. The film remained effectively buried until the 1970s, when Martin Scorsese championed its restoration and re-release, calling it a masterpiece that looked into the darkness of voyeurism inherent in cinema itself. Modern critics now regard it as a misunderstood classic, decades ahead of its time in examining how media consumption shapes violence. Number 4. Salt of the Earth, 1954. Salt of the Earth wasn't just boycotted, it was actively suppressed by the federal government, Hollywood unions, and studio bosses who feared its pro-labor, feminist, Mexican-American perspective represented actual communism. This independently produced film about New Mexico's zinc miners fighting for equal pay and safety was made by blacklisted Hollywood talents, including director Herbert Biberman. Production faced unprecedented obstruction. The FBI monitored filming, local police harassed crew members, and vigilante groups fired shots at the set. Hollywood craft unions, under pressure from studio heads, refused to process the film. Only 12 theaters nationwide would screen it, with projectionist unions often refusing to run it. When the film's lead actress, Rosaura Revueltas, who played the strike leader's wife, traveled from Mexico for filming, immigration officials detained and deported her before shooting completed. The film's most radical element wasn't its labor politics, but its feminist stance. The miners' strike succeeds only when wives take over the picket line after an injunction bars the men. This dual challenge to both capitalism and patriarchy was considered un-American by many critics. Congressman Donald Jackson declared on the House floor that the film was a new weapon for Russia, while Howard Hughes personally pressured theaters not to show it. Despite winning international awards in Europe, Salt of the Earth was effectively buried in America for decades. When finally rediscovered in the 1970s, critics were shocked by its progressive gender politics and authentic portrayal of Mexican-American communities. The Library of Congress would eventually select it for preservation in the National Film Registry, the same government that once tried to suppress it, now recognizing its cultural significance. Number 3. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, 1932. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang didn't just shock audiences, it changed actual prison laws in several southern states. Based on Robert E. Burns' autobiography, this Warner Brothers social exposé starred Paul Muni as a wrongfully convicted man subjected to brutal chain gang conditions, including whippings, starvation, and torture. The film's unflinching portrayal of American prison brutality sparked nationwide debate about penal reform and embarrassed states still using chain gang labor. Georgia officials were so outraged they threatened Warner Brothers with legal action, unsuccessfully demanded all prints be destroyed, and put pressure on theaters not to screen it. Burns, whose memoir inspired the film, remained a fugitive while secretly consulting on the production. He couldn't attend the premiere because Georgia authorities were actively hunting him. Studio chief Jack Warner received death threats from anonymous Southern sources, while theater owners in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi faced vandalism for showing the film. The film's most controversial element was its gut-punch ending, where Muni's character, having escaped again after being returned to the chain gang, disappears into darkness after telling his girlfriend, "I steal." This bleak conclusion, required by the real Burns' continued fugitive status, left audiences stunned. The New York Times reported that opening night viewers sat spellbound as credits rolled in silence. The public outcry following release led directly to chain gang reforms in multiple states, with Georgia ultimately pardoning Burns in 1945, 13 years after the film's release. Director Mervyn LeRoy later claimed he received hundreds of letters from prisoners thanking him for exposing their conditions. Despite studio fears of commercial failure for such grim material, it became one of Warner Brothers' highest-grossing films of the Depression era. Number 2. The Children's Hour, 1961. The Children's Hour dared to tackle lesbianism when merely acknowledging homosexuality's existence violated the production code. William Wyler's drama, starring Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine as teachers accused of having a lesbian relationship by a manipulative student, was based on Lillian Hellman's play that had caused theater shutdowns decades earlier. The original Broadway production had been banned in Boston, Chicago, and London in the 1930s. Even in 1961, the subject remained so taboo that United Artists Marketing never mentioned the film's actual content, vaguely describing it as about the power of a lie. The Production Code Administration initially refused approval, relenting only when Wyler agreed to remove any physical contact between the women and include MacLaine's suicide as punishment for her character's desires. International censorship was even more severe. Italy banned it completely, while Spain and other Catholic countries demanded extensive cuts. The film's most controversial scene shows MacLaine's character finally acknowledging her sexuality, saying, "I have loved you the way they said." This simple admission was considered so shocking that several theater chains refused to book the film despite its prestigious cast. Critics were notably uncomfortable. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times awkwardly avoided mentioning homosexuality entirely in his review, calling it a nasty accusation. The film lost money on its initial release, despite critical acclaim for the performances. When Wyler had previously filmed the same story in 1936 as These Three, the production code had forced him to change the accusation from lesbianism to a heterosexual love triangle, making the 1961 version a direct challenge to Hollywood's censorship system. Both Hepburn and MacLaine later described receiving hate mail from religious groups for appearing in the film. Number 1. Gone with the Wind, 1939. Gone with the Wind wasn't just a box office phenomenon. It sparked protests, boycotts, and international incidents while becoming the highest-grossing film in history. Producer David O. Selznick's adaptation of Margaret Mitchell's Civil War epic was criticized before a single frame was shot, black newspapers condemning its romanticized portrayal of slavery and the Confederacy. The NAACP urged Selznick to eliminate the novel's racist elements, including use of the N-word, which he did, though the film still presented slavery as a genteel institution, with happy servants devoted to white masters. International controversies multiplied after release. Nazi Germany banned it for showing American resilience they didn't want German audiences to see. The Soviet Union prohibited it until Stalin's death, condemning its glorification of bourgeois values. It was banned in Ireland for positive portrayal of divorce. But the most enduring controversy centered on Hattie McDaniel, who became the first black Oscar winner while being forced to sit at a segregated table during the ceremony and forbidden from attending the film's Atlanta premiere due to Georgia segregation laws. The production itself was tumultuous. 3 directors were fired, multiple script rewrites attempted to soften the novel's racism, and Selznick faced a $5,000 fine for including Clark Gable's famous line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." The casting of British actress Vivien Leigh as Southern Belle Scarlett O'Hara caused outrage among Southern heritage groups who demanded an American actress. Despite these controversies, or because of them, the film earned an unprecedented $32 million during its initial release, equivalent to over $600 million today. Adjusted for inflation, it remains the highest-grossing film in American history. Modern screenings often include disclaimers about its historical inaccuracies and problematic racial portrayals, acknowledging that the most commercially successful film of Hollywood's golden era also perpetuated harmful myths about American history. Hollywood's golden era created films that forever changed cinema, but not without battles over censorship, representation, and morality that still resonate today. From challenging racial stereotypes to pushing sexual boundaries, these films forced audiences to confront uncomfortable realities through the lens of entertainment. Were these necessary provocations that advanced film as an art form, or did some cross-ethical lines better left uncrossed? And perhaps most importantly, would any of these controversial classics even raise eyebrows in today's anything-goes media landscape? Or have we lost something vital in no longer being shocked by what we see on screen? Drop your thoughts below. But remember, our reaction says as much about our current cultural moment as it does about these cinematic time capsules.